Hello, this is me, Yulia Badryzlova, and the talk exploring semantic concreteness and abstractness for metaphor identification and beyond. Well, metaphor occupies a place of prominence in contemporary linguistics. It is recognized to be a powerful cognitive tool with which humans conceptualize. Metaphor is pervasive. Its frequency is estimated invariably high in different types of discourse, and thus it forms an integral and a fundamental part of the language system. Metaphor creates ambiguity, and so it poses a serious challenge to NLP applications. Different types of features have been suggested for training classifiers to identify metaphor, such as lexical, morphological, and syntactic, distributional, semantic, and topic modeling features, as well as features derived from lexical thesauri and ontologies, and psycholinguistic features, such as concreteness and abstractness, imageability, effect, and force. The present study focuses on the latter type of features, and namely on concreteness and abstractness. Application of this feature for metaphor identification relies on solid theoretical groundwork, such as the theories of embodied and grounded cognition and the theory of primary and conceptual metaphor, which claim that human thinking and human knowledge are intrinsically metaphoric, since they are grounded in sensory motor systems, and metaphor is the primary mechanism for transferring these sensory motor experiences into the domain of subjective experience. Well, how can one compute the concreteness and abstractness of a word, or more precisely of its referent? Well, the established approach is to take a set of known concrete and known abstract words, which is called paradigm, and compute the semantic similarity between each word in the lexicon and each of the paradigm words. In experiments with English data, the paradigm is drawn from the MRC psycholinguistic database, where each word has a human score to evaluating the perceived degree of its concreteness. Well, as you see, computing indexes of concreteness and abstractness is a rather non-trivial and language-specific task, which requires resources designed specifically for the language in question. Turney and co-authors were one of the first to apply concreteness and abstractness for metaphor identification. They experimented with the Trope Finder TroFi database in two settings, one using cross-validation and the other using separate train and test splits. Since TroFi is a freely available data set, in present study we replicate the experiments by Turney et al. For the purposes of comparability, using our own concreteness and abstractness indexes. Speaking about Russian metaphor identification with concreteness and abstractness, it has been explored only once in these multilingual experiments by Lakoff and colleagues. Yet they do not generate an authentic indexes of concreteness and abstractness for all of these languages. They do it only once for English, and then project the English model onto the non-English languages using an electronic dictionary. So there is a research gap. To the best of our knowledge, presently there are no studies on metaphor identification with concreteness and abstractness indexes which are generated specifically for Russian. Besides, we think that computationally generated indexes of concreteness and abstractness may be indicative of the semantic categories of abstractness and concreteness, and thus they may have broader application for the computational studies of the semantics of these categories. Therefore, we set the following objectives for our study: to collect a Russian and an English Con-Abs paradigm, compute Con-Abs indexes for a large Russian and a large English vocabulary, use them to train classifiers for metaphor identification, replicate previous identification experiments and compare our results to theirs, and study the distribution of con and abs indexes in the lexicon and see how they align with our intuitions about the semantics of concreteness and abstractness. Following previous studies with English data, we populate our English paradigm using the data from the MRC database. The abstractness seed list is populated by words with the lowest concreteness scores in the MRC, and the words with the highest concreteness scores are, we divide them into two seed lists: animate and inanimate. Besides, we use a fourth aggregate concreteness seed list where both animate and inanimate nouns are represented in equal proportions. We use two Russian paradigms. One is based on the psycholinguistic database compiled at the Kazan Federal University, and therefore we refer to it by this name, the Kazan Paradigm. The psycholinguistic database contains 500 most frequent Russian words ranked by human judges. Once again, we take nouns with the highest concreteness indexes to fill our concreteness seed list, and the nouns with the lowest concreteness indexes to populate our abstractness seed list. The second Russian paradigm, I'll be calling it Moscow Con-Abs Paradigm, is drawn from the Karkaslov thesaurus, which contains human annotations for Russian words, assigning them to one of the semantic categories in the ontology. We take nouns with scores of 0.98 or above, both in human and computer-generated annotation. The abstractness seed list is populated with nouns from the category abstract, and the concreteness seed list is filled with words from the category physical entity. As for the size of the Con-Abs paradigms, we have experimented with different sizes ranging from 360 to 40 words per seed list. Yet we observed no noticeable effect on the results of classification. Besides, Turney and colleagues recommend 40 as the optimal size of a paradigm, since they observed a problematic amount of overfitting with larger paradigms. So we stick to this size, 40 lexemes per seed list. To measure the semantic similarity, we used English and Russian pre-trained continuous skip-gram distributional semantic models by Andrei Kutuzov and colleagues. Thus, we generate 4 types of Con-Abs ranking for English and for Russian. The English rankings are computed with the animate, inanimate, concrete, and abstract seed lists, while the Russian ranking are computed with the abstract and concrete seed lists of the Moscow and the Kazan paradigms. We work with 2 data sets, Russian and an English. The English data set is the same as in the experiments by Turney and colleagues, which we are replicating here. TroFi is a collection of about 4,000 sentences, each of which contains one of the 50 polysemous target verbs, and the sentences are annotated by class, literal or non-literal. The Russian data set will be called RusNet in this study. It contains about 7,000 sentences, each of which contains one of the 20 polysemous target verbs, and the sentences are annotated by class, metaphorical or non-metaphorical. Following Turney and co-authors, we run experiments with two settings. In the first setting, the subset of each target verb is treated as a separate learning problem. So we train a model for each subset using cross-validation. The results are evaluating using the micro-averaged F1 score and accuracy. And the second setting is when we train on one half of the target verb and test on the other half. The metaphor identification task is formulated as sentence-level binary classification, metaphorical versus non-metaphorical. We use full sentential context, that is, we take the indexes of all the content words in a sentence. In all the experiments, we use all the 4 types of Con-Abs indexes and train an SVM classifier. We compare the results to the baseline model trained on the statistics of the occurrence of lexemes. The choice of this baseline was motivated by earlier research which observed that simple lemma frequencies may perform surprisingly well on some data sets. Well, the results. Looking at the English results, we see that our models perform comparably with Turney and colleagues' research, or outperform them by a narrow margin. With the exception of the F1 score in the first setting, where our model significantly surpasses previous research. Looking at the Russian results, we see that overall they are higher than the English ones. We explain this by the highly unbalanced setup of the TroFi dataset. Then, when comparing the Con-Abs models to the lemma baselines, we see that it is either comparable to the baseline or outstrips them, sometimes by a good margin, like, for example, in this case, of the accuracy in the English experiments in both settings. Besides, we see that when we compare the two settings in each of the experiments, the setting with when a separate model was trained for each of the target verbs outperforms the setting when we train on one set of target verbs and test on the other subset of target verbs. Because in the first setting, the model learns to capture local idiosyncratic patterns of each verb, and in the second setting, the task is more challenging. The model has to capture the patterns which are common to all verbs, irrespective of the idiosyncrasies of their compatibility. To put our concreteness-abstractness indexes to test, we took 451 known abstract nouns and 571 known concrete nouns from Karkaslov. These are the nouns which have not been used in any of the paradigms. And we clustered them using k-means clustering algorithm with the number of clusters set to 2, with the resulting accuracy of 0.99. This graph shows that the Con-Abs indexes neatly fall into 2 distinct clusters. And here below the plot, you can see the few misclassified nouns. The efficiency of the metaphor classification with the Con-Abs indexes and the high accuracy in the reliability test encourages us to suggest that there may be some ground truth behind our computationally generated Con-Abs indexes, and that they are worth being scrutinized in terms of how they align with our intuitions about the semantic categories of concreteness and abstractness. Well, it would be very natural to expect that words with high concreteness would be low in abstractness and vice versa. Yet, Pearson correlation reveals no statistically significant correspondence between the Con and the Abs rankings. Obviously, the picture is not as straightforward as we initially expect. These plots show the correspondences between the concreteness and abstractness indexes in the Russian and the English lexicon. The words are ordered by their concreteness indexes in the descending order, thus forming a smooth sigmoid curve. And the dots represent the abstractness indexes which correspond to each of the concreteness indexes in the curve. Well, we see that in both cases, in the beginning, when concreteness is high, all the abstractness indexes are located below the curve, forming areas of high density. So this is the group of words, the part of highly concrete vocabulary with high concreteness and low abstractness. And if we look at the opposite end of the curve, we see that eventually there is a section of it where all the abstractness indexes are above the curve. Although the gap between them is not so as pronounced as in the beginning. This is the part of the highly abstract vocabulary with high abstract and low concrete indexes. If we take a look along this long, steep part of the curve, we see that although the abstractness indexes are scattered both above and below the curve, yet as the curve goes down, the majority of the abstractness indexes are located above it. So thus, there is a trend for abstractness to increase as the concreteness is decreasing, which seems to correspond to our intuitions about concreteness and abstractness. If we compare the two abstractness, the two Con-Abs rankings, Russian rankings generated with the Moscow and the Kazan paradigms, we can see that in the latter case, the variance of abstractness indexes in the Kazan ranking is very low. We think that this is due to the fact that the words in the Kazan paradigm are high frequency words, and thus they tend to occur with with a wide range of vocabulary, and thus their distributional semantic vectors are not so indicative of concreteness and abstractness. Let me move this a bit. This slide represents some of the words from the top, the middle, and the end of the Russian ranking. The top concrete words are pillowcase, napkin, bed, throw on, lead, blanket, and so on, and all of them are nouns. The words from the middle are a mix of concrete words, for example, to sell or to practice, and abstract words, for example, centennial or zeal. And the top abstract words are correspond, differentiation, involvement, proliferation, separation, and so on. So far, so good. This looks good and quite feasible. Now, let's look at the English examples from the top, the middle, and the end of the English ranking. The top concrete words are shrimp, crab, tomato, scallop, chicken, mussel, and so on. And again, all of them are nouns. Once again, the words in the middle are a mix of concrete words, for example, swing, carrier, smash, unload, and abstract words such as perilous or enumeration. And the top abstract words are vitro, open-ended, interdepartmental, rejection, discredit, hold, and so on, which also looks true to life. A couple of concluding insights which have been gleaned from comparing different rankings computed for one language. For example, the two Russian abstractness rankings, one computed with the Moscow paradigm and the other computed with the Kazan paradigm, show a moderately strong correlation between them, which allows us to cautiously suggest that it reflects the fact that the category of abstractness is semantically more homogeneous than the category of concreteness. And the two English concrete rankings, the animate and inanimate, show a strong positive correlation between them, and thus this may indicate that both animate and inanimate nouns are equally representative of the semantic category of concreteness. Well, this is the end of the talk. All the materials, the Russian data set, and the Con-Abs rankings for English and Russian are available at this link. Please see the selected references, and thank you for your attention.